All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining me again today. I am so excited to have on with me the man who I can say for sure has changed the way that I view health and diet more than anyone else, probably ever. I've been seedling the Plant Free MD in different episodes in the past, telling people to go listen to this podcast because it just completely changes the way you think about what you eat. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Anthony Chaffee.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on.
Why don't we start with your backstory? Because you had quite an interesting one. We both grew up in the Northwest. I'm also a UW alumni, so I know that you went through there on your path. So why don't you give us a little rundown of where you came from and how you got here to talking about meat on YouTube?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I was always interested in nutrition just um from a biological standpoint, just from a medical standpoint. I always wanted to be a doctor, and that was never lost on me. Nutrition, the value of nutrition for health was never lost on me. And so I wanted to learn that first of all. So I took the traditional nutrition classes in college, but I also was taking biology and botany and genetics and biochemistry and then cancer biology. So, getting a good background, scientific background of education. And while doing that, I was taking a class in cancer biology. And my professor was talking about all the different carcinogens that just naturally occurred in the foods that we ate, namely in the plants that we eat, not in the meat that we eat. There are no carcinogens in the meat that we eat. You can burn the living hell out of it, and you'll get some, but they're quite weak. Studies looking at those were done in animals and at thousands of times the amount that you'd actually see in a burnt piece of meat. So not necessarily as meaningful as people may think, but the ones in plants are quite abundant, and they're quite universal. All plants will make these defense chemicals. And I learned this in botany, that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive. And animals becoming more and more adapted to specific toxins in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. And that becomes their dedicated resource. So we were going over all of this again, but from a cancer perspective. So we're looking at carcinogens, and he told us that there were thousands of times more naturally occurring toxins in plants by weight than the pesticides we spread on them. For instance, this is a normal thing that we see in plants. Most plants on Earth are actually inedible, meaning that they're so toxic that they're not safe to eat in any amount, and they could kill you. And so, of course, you're causing damage, metabolic damage, structural damage, genetic damage to your body with these toxins, and those could precipitate cancer down the line. So that's the idea, is that some of these things are carcinogenic. And so we were looking at it from that perspective, and he said that there was 136 known carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts, and over 100 in mushrooms, but over 60, over 80 in spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, all the different fruits and vegetables that we would eat as a normal part of our diet. And we were quite taken aback by that. I remember we all thought he was joking. We were looking around wildly, thinking there must be someone in on the joke. Someone must be laughing in the corner or something like that. I was looking for a TA somewhere that was just snickering in the corner or something like that. But there wasn't any. And so eventually it just sort of dawned on us that he was serious. And I remember thinking in my head, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? Even though they're packed with carcinogens. And he just sort of looked at us, and I felt like he read my mind, because he just gave us a funny look, and he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. I was like, I just made a decision then. Great, not eating plants. I'm just done with that. I was also very interested in nutrition because of my athletics. I always played sports since I was a kid. I trained in MMA, then rugby. I was an All-American. I played at UW. I played for the Seattle, premiership team at the time as well. And so I was training I would finish it at UW at 3. I'd be at UW training at 3:30. I'd train until about 6:30, and then I go straight to my men's team practice at 7. I go 7 to 9:30, and then I go to the gym. So it was a very, very busy schedule. And I was able to do it, but now I felt amazing. Now I felt amazing doing it. I never ran out of energy. I could just go, 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 go.
So
I
you
was training.
eliminated the plants at this point and gone like pretty carnivore at that point without really even knowing it. It didn't have a label, but you just stopped eating plants.
That's it. So yeah, I went to the grocery store, and I just was looking around like, well, what the hell do I eat? Because it's just it's all plants. There's plants in everything. It's either that's the main ingredient, like bread, pasta, or produce, or at least is included in something. And so I just was walking around in a daze going, well, what the hell do I eat? And I just came around some eggs. I was like, okay, eggs. Eggs don't come from plants. I'll get some eggs. And meat doesn't come from plants. I'll get some meat. So I wasn't doing a carnivore diet. There wasn't anything by that name, and at that time, and I didn't put two and two together at the time with what I had learned since I was a child, that humans are apex predators, top of the food chain. We've been hunters and carnivores for millions of years. Like that's what the evidence shows, and that's what we teach grade school kids, or at least we did before the vegan propaganda started. And coming indoctrinating everybody. But that's what I was taught as a kid, that humans are apex predators, and that's what paleoanthropologists show and archaeologists show. That's what the fossil record shows, and that's what our biology shows. And so it's really important to eat to your biological design. We as a species are about 300,000 years old. We are living in modern times, but our genetics are still hundreds of thousands of years old. So we haven't changed too much since then, but some adaptations more recently with the introduction of agriculture 8 to 10,000 years ago for some people, but not for everyone. And 10,000 years is not nearly long enough to become fully adapted to these plant toxins, and certainly not all the plant toxins. You can't just there's different ones. Plants make about 1 million different defense chemicals, and so you might, as a species of animals, you might over hundreds of thousands of years build up immunity to specific poisons in specific plants. So you can eat that plant and survive, but you're not going to eat all the other plants. So even herbivores that exclusively eat plants, they eat a very specific diet. They eat very specific plants, and they eat other plants. They can get very sick or die even. There's a whole field of veterinary medicine, especially livestock medicine, where there's specific diseases like big head, limp neck, big tongue, crazy cow syndrome, that are all diseases, but they're not diseases. We know these are toxicities. They come from eating the wrong plant, and they don't have the defenses against those plants, and they get sick, but not sick enough to just die. Some plants will just kill them, and they tend to avoid those things. But if you're stuck in a pasture and you run out of feed, you run out of forage, that's when you start seeing animals eating other plants that they're really not designed for, and they can get very hurt or they can die. So it usually doesn't happen in the wild. There's other nutritional issues as well, coming from not getting enough of what you need. So muscular dystrophy exists in cows. Not everybody knows that. I didn't know that. I learned this last year, speaking to ranchers and vets. And in fact, it's apparently, from what they're saying, it is the exact same disease. It presents the exact same way as it does in humans, but they have figured out that it actually comes from a selenium deficiency. So they call it nutritional muscular dystrophy, right? So that begs the question, has anyone looked into nutritional deficiencies, specifically selenium, for humans with muscular dystrophy? Has anyone looked at that? Because you have, well, it's genetic. Well, no, you have genetic predisposition, but generally you have an environmental trigger. And so maybe these people that have selenium deficiencies with that genetic predisposition can develop muscular dystrophy, just like the cows can. Not all cows will necessarily get this. I would expect that there's a genetic component to that as well. But maybe it's just across the board, you get a selenium deficiency and you get this in cows. I'm not sure. But either way, that's part of it. And so has anybody ever asked that? I don't know if they have. There's not a lot of communication between the vet world and the human MD world. So that's something that I think really requires investigation to think about. And that's what a lot of diseases are that I've found, is a combination of toxicities and malnutrition, these so-called non-communicable chronic diseases, NCDs, which make up about 90% of the issues that doctors treat nowadays. These things didn't exist in any real number before the 20th century, and really before 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. Heart disease was the number one killer at the time, but it wasn't even heard of in the 1910s and 1920s. It wasn't until the 1930s that this really started taking off. And then obviously it's been a major problem since then. But these other chronic diseases haven't really. They've gone on the rise and been sort of slowly coming up. But then in the last 40 years, they've really come up decade after decade after decade. And people say, well, it's just screening. We're doing better at screening. No, you're having people that are having more first-time heart attacks. That has nothing to do with screening. People are getting heart attacks. It's just that they're surviving more, And so, and the mortality rate around the world is actually going up for heart attacks, heart disease, stroke.
Well, we're eating less red meat than ever, by the way. So that should immediately be just the alarm bell in people's heads. Like, this doesn't add up to what we're being told on TV, people. Because red meat intake is plummeting. If you ask any random person out in public, do you think red meat is good for you? 9 out of 10 say no, it gives you a heart attack. Yeah. So people aren't eating it. They've been given permission by the overlords to just stuff their faces with, bread and garbage.
Yeah. Well, they tell you that obesity is genetic. It doesn't matter. You just have to take Ozempic and just take these drugs and all that sort of stuff. Diet and exercise doesn't matter. So eat all the candy and cake. It doesn't matter. But red meat's bad for you. Like, what? What's wrong with you? So
only the things that make you more hungry when you eat them. Peculiar.
Yeah, they're saying that everything is genetic except for red meat. Red meat causes death, and everything else is genetic. It's just foolish. And and that's the thing. You're right. We've actually significantly reduced the amount of red meat that we've been eating in the last 40 years, especially since the 1970s. We've in America reduced our red meat consumption by over 1/3. Increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased grains, significantly, increased amounts of sugars and high fructose corn syrup that we eat by over 3-fold, and increased the so-called heart healthy polyunsaturated vegetable oil, seed oils by over 3-fold as well. And what happened since then? Well, the rates of heart disease went up, cancer rates went up, diabetes rates went up, stroke rates went up, autoimmunity went up, Alzheimer's went up, depression went up, autism went up, psychiatric conditions went up, ADHD, bipolar disorder, major depression, anxiety, all these other sorts of issues, schizophrenia. These things are on the rise. Why would they be on the rise? Right. Well, we just didn't notice it before. Really, you didn't notice someone with Crohn's disease before having 30 bloody bowel motions a day? Really? You just didn't catch that? That's ridiculous. We've been describing these diseases for quite some time, and people know what they were. But the problem is that people just think that, well, they take the easy way out. They just say that, well, we're seeing it on the rise now, but it was probably already always there. We just didn't see it. Like, why would you assume that? People have actually taken extremely detailed and careful records and medical records. We have medical records going back to Galen and Hippocrates, right? So why would we think that we only figured out how to use a pencil last week, right? So, we had people. People just don't know medical history. You read these things. Read William Osler. He was one of the great medical teachers of all time, and he wrote several books and textbooks. He was the first professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins, and he has a whole textbook and looking at all these diseases. This is how you treat them. This is what you see. This is what you do. Nothing in there was heart disease, heart attacks, anything like that. Through his entire career, he described 6 episodes that could potentially be, symptomatically would be similar to angina, but no heart attacks. He never described a single person dying from a heart attack that he saw. The first confirmed death by heart attack on autopsy in America was in 1912, and no one believed him because they said, we've never seen this. We've all done thousands of autopsies. Thousands of other doctors have done thousands of autopsies over the last 100 to 200 years. No one's ever seen this. This isn't in the literature anywhere. And people published because you did autopsies and autopsies and autopsies and autopsies and autopsies to try to see what you could find, what you can do, what you could figure out, and what you could discover that was new ways of dying, new ways of people getting sick, because you got your name on things. If you discovered something new, your name was immortalized. You have Osler's nodes after William Osler. You have Trendelenburg gait. You have Cushing's disease. You have Colley's fracture. You have Alzheimer's disease, all these sorts of things, right? These are named after the people who discovered them and first described them and first published on them. So that was how you immortalized your name. Everyone wanted to do this, right? And so this guy published on this heart attack. This person died from this thrombus blocking the coronary vessels and looks like it killed the heart muscles. People were like, we think you got that wrong. We've never seen that. We've never heard of that. Doesn't make sense. And they didn't believe him for another 10 years or so, into the 1920s, when more of these started showing up. And so they were like, oh, okay, maybe there's a new disease on the horizon. 10 years later, it's the #1 killer in America. Is that really just because no one was paying attention? People were paying attention. They were doing copious amounts of autopsies. They just did not see it, right? The entire century of the 1800s, there isn't a single published record in America or elsewhere, I believe, that I know of someone dying from a heart attack and being shown on autopsy. There's one obscure reference to a conference where someone presented a case report of an autopsy they found that looked like this. Well, look, it looked like there's this thrombus in the coronary vessels of the heart. Isn't that strange? We've never seen that before. No one's ever seen that before. Isn't that weird? Right? So late 1700s, they saw it, they picked it up, and nothing for another 130 years until you get to 1912. And again, then they were like, look, we've never heard of this, right? So, they didn't think that was something. I'm sure that there were heart attacks in between it, but there weren't enough to be picked up on autopsy. There weren't enough to hit the radar, that people weren't describing this weird way that people were dying. And before that either, Dr. Harvey described the circulatory system. He figured that out. No one had ever figured that out in thousands of years. He figured that out. You know how many hearts and autopsies and bodies he had to look at before he figured out what's going on? And he didn't see a single one. He didn't see a single myocardial infarction, not once. That doesn't make any sense. If they were so prevalent, if this was just the #1 killer, because in the 1800s, we were eating more meat than we were in the early 1900s, especially, and a lot more lard. We didn't have the seed oils. We didn't have access to sugar. We didn't have all the refined grains. It was meat. People ate meat if they could get it, and they would eat plants to fill in the gaps or for preference, for taste and things like that. But people ate meat. They ate a lot of meat, and they ate a lot of fatty meat. They were never worried about that. In 1911, I think the average American ate around 16 pounds of butter a year. And now it's a fraction of that. And the heart disease rates and the heart disease deaths from heart disease is far higher, right? So these things aren't even correlated. Meat and animal fat are not even correlated with heart disease or chronic disease, if you look back, because these diseases were almost non-existent up until the 20th century, and they've only become more and more prevalent since then. And you can say, well, maybe we just weren't paying attention in the 1970s and 60s. Okay, but then we were paying attention in the 80s and 90s when people made that excuse. Maybe we just weren't noticing. I remember them saying that in the 1990s when I was a kid. Type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes. And then type 1 diabetes was called juvenile diabetes. And so all of a sudden there's a bunch of 10-year-olds getting diagnosed with adult onset diabetes, and they're saying, how the hell is this? It's a kid. Kids don't get adult onset diabetes, they're kids, right? And they have fatty liver disease. But we only see that in alcoholics. And this kid's never had a drink of alcohol in his life. Like, what the hell is going on? So instead of thinking about that for literally 1 second and thinking like, okay, what changed in our environment? Well, we massively dropped off the amount of meat and fat we're eating, completely changed our diet in this other direction because we were told that it was deleterious to our health to do otherwise. And then we see this massive reduction in health and massive increase in disease burden, especially in younger and younger and younger people. that should have hit some warning bells and alarm bells, but apparently it didn't. They just said, what was probably happening all the time. We probably just misdiagnosed these things as juvenile diabetes or adult, instead of, because they were just kids and no one looked at it. These are completely different diseases. Type 2 diabetes, you still make insulin. It's just not covering you for your demands, because you're just cranking in the amount of sugars and carbs and things like that. And it overwhelms your body's capacity to lower your blood sugar. It is not the same as type 1 diabetes, where you don't make insulin at all and you lose 30 pounds in 3 days and you're peeing like mad and you're thirsty as hell and you're extremely sick and you go into ketoacidosis and die. You don't get that with type 2 diabetes. These are two very different diseases with very different presentations, and they have very different treatments. So no, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know what led them off down the wrong path, if there was industry involved or different special interests that pushed for this. I have no idea. But either way, we just ignored it. We ignored a massive departure from our health. And we just started saying, okay, well, it's type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? Instead of thinking, well, what changed in our environment? What changed around us? And that's what changed. There are dishonest actors that will try to pretend that this didn't happen, that these diseases aren't on the rise. But I mean, that's just foolish. I mean, we can clearly see these things are getting worse. But they'll say with heart disease, they'll try to change the argument. They'll try to shift the goalpost and say, well, the age adjusted mortality rate of cardiovascular disease had peaked in the 60s and 70s and then started coming down after we started reducing meat and saturated fat and animal fat in particular, and taking all these medications to lower cholesterol. So that's great. Well, that's not what we said. We said the rates of heart disease are going up. The amount of people having first-time heart attacks are going up. They say, well, that's just screening, not first-time heart attacks. You can't just screen for a heart attack. Someone has a heart attack, then they go to the hospital and they are saved. They survive. They get, angioplasty, angiogram. They pull the clot out. They put in a stent. They revascularize that area, reperfuse that area, and they survive instead of dying out somewhere. We have better access to medical care in Western countries. We have better access to medical care. We have better access to doctors, better access to better equipment and new technologies. We have people have significantly reduced smoking. In the 1920s, 80% of men smoked, right? So massive difference in that as well. And so obviously that's going to change things also. But the number of people having their first heart attack is going up decade after decade. It's just that they're surviving. So it's very dishonest for people to say that these diseases aren't getting worse. In fact, they're getting better. Okay, are they as good as 1910? Are they as good as 1905, before Alzheimer's disease was described? Because that was the first time it was described. Dr. Alzheimer's reported, again, at an obscure conference with one case of a lady who had this weird state of cognitive decline in her elder years, and no one really cared at the conference, from the sounds of it, except one guy who was quite notable in the field of neurology, and he actually published a massive book of neurological disorders, and he published that case, and he included that, and he called it Alzheimer's dementia, and so that's how that came into being. It was 1906. And there isn't a single reference in the literature before that describing a similar set of disease and symptoms by a different name. It is a new disease. Dementia was new. Well, people just didn't live that long. Bullshit. If they lived to adulthood, they most typically lived to be as old as us or older. George Washington, all the founding fathers, these guys were born in the 1700s. And they all lived pretty normal lifespans because they weren't killed by something. My great-grandfather was born in 1875. He died in 1975 at home without dementia. Socrates was in his late 70s when he was so sharp that they were like, this guy's trouble. We have to kill him. And they killed him with a plant, by the way. They made him drink hemlock. So, people did not just die in their 30s. That's ridiculous. People in the founding fathers, most of them were in their 20s or 30s George Washington was 45. Ben Franklin was in his 60s at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And then they lived on and led the country after that. So, and no one was saying like Socrates, oh my God, he's just the oldest man alive. This is crazy. How the hell is he living so long? He was just a normal guy. Just a normal guy living a normal life, right? And no one was shocked by the fact that he was in his late 70s, right? So this is just people just trying to explain away what's going on in front of them, what's going on right in front of their eyes, right? You go back further. You go back to ancient Egypt 4,000 years ago, something called the Eber's Papyrus, EBERS. That's a medical document. It describes all the different sorts of medical conditions and problems that they saw at the time when they were eating a lot of grains. Just majority of their food was grains for both the common people and the pharaohs, and a lot of beer. And they actually had pressed seed oils as well, fairly similar to what we're doing now, except not all the artificial garbage and even more junk that we're having today. But similar, a lot of grains, pressed seed oils, and beers, alcohol, right? You look at their statues. It's not like the Greek statues of Heracles and things like that, where these guys are just shredded beasts. They were overweight. They had beer bellies, and the men had gynecomastia, which is man boobs, right? And so that's not good, but that's what we saw in representation of their statues. And in the Eber's Papyrus, they knew what the signs were that someone would get before they had a heart attack. They knew what diabetes was. They knew what these chronic diseases were that we're facing now. They described them 4,000 years ago when they were eating tons of grains, a lot of alcohol, and seed oils. They had the same diseases that we're getting now, and not when we're eating a bunch of meat. What was taught, or was sometimes taught, is that the pharaohs, they found atherosclerosis in the arteries of the pharaohs. And I said, well, but these are wealthy. These are the ones that would have been able to afford meat. Everyone was mummified back then. That was just the burial traditions. It wasn't just the pharaohs. So there are actually more mummies in Egypt now than there are people living in Egypt now. And so there's
You're
a
kidding.
lot of
The total population?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That's statistic. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, but they've just been mummifying their people for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So we have a lot of data. We have a lot of places we can look at. And so you get just the normal people. They all had atherosclerosis. And there's something called the stable isotope technology, where you can take a sample and you can look at the amount of nitrogen 15, and you can get an idea of what they were eating. The pharaohs and the common people were eating the exact same thing. It's just obviously the people that were wealthy could get more of it and be more immune to famine and things like that, where the normal people might starve a bit or die of starvation. But they were all eating the same thing. They were eating grains. They were eating a lot of grains, seed oils, and beer, alcohol, and they were all getting atherosclerosis. It wasn't just the wealthy that were getting atherosclerosis. They were all getting atherosclerosis, and the Eber's Papyrus is very clear that they were getting all these sorts of so-called modern diseases of civilization, and that should tip you off too. If we're having hunter-gatherer populations, even up as far as this century or last century, that they started becoming more westernized, and then those diseases of civilization start coming up, that should tell you something. And anthropologists talk about this in their writing, such as in the Native Americans. They go this transition period of infectious disease and injury and all this, and then they become more civilized and they get all these diseases of civilization, these so-called chronic diseases. Why would you just get those just because you live in a house? Is there something about a house that makes you get diabetes, right?
Or civilization label is just, what does that even mean?
Exactly. Yeah. It's just you're not out living naturally, and now you're getting sick. Okay. So something in that change, in that transition, is what is causing you to be sick. It's not genetic. It's not that, they'd all get diabetes and cancer if they lived long enough. They just died at 22. No, they don't.
Genetics don't just drop the hammer on you out of nowhere. That's not how nature works. And
no.
And just sort of a side note here is that humans aren't thinking of themselves as animals as they should. Like, we are animals
Yeah.
in nature, and if we can watch the animals, as you talked about, how there's the evolutionary arms race going on between the critters and the
Mhm.
plants that they can eat. They get sort of locked into the one versus one track where they're just kind of with that plant all the way. So they've
Yeah.
evolved to eat that. And here come the humans. We get this big brain from eating lots of meat during the ice ages because there are no plants. That's when our brain grew the most. We got
Mhm.
really smart, and then we got too smart for our own good, and we started deciding, let's just try eating everything and we'll
Mhm.
monetize it. And the agricultural revolution comes on, they start selling everything, like, and then here comes a balanced diet. Oh my goodness, that's the perfect thing for business, right? Just make people eat all of these things that make them more hungry and don't satiate them so they can make more money. And that's where we are now.
Yeah, and a lot of it had to do with money, because a lot of these industries are the ones that skewed the record significantly. So Crisco was originally invented by, I think, by the Germans in the early 1900s as a machine lubricant, right? So this is a seed oil, right? So it started with like cottonseed oil. Um, the Germans made that, I think, usually in the early 1900s, possibly throughout World War One, as the grease for their tanks and things like that, I believe. But anyway, around that era, around that
They
time,
all, like,
and
so
Procter,
many of these things trace back to wars because that's when
yeah,
governments really just go full steam ahead on just making all this stuff. And then as soon as
mm,
the war is
yeah,
over, like, oh crap, how do we make money on all these things that we built these assembly lines to make? So they have all this oil. Like, I guess we should just feed it to people, see what happens.
yeah, that's it. See what happens. Yeah, it's same. Yeah, should be fine. So Procter and Gamble bought Crisco from, I'm pretty sure it was Crisco, but anyway, one of these seed oils from the Germans, and then they paid the equivalent of $20 million to the American Heart Association to 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 say that it was healthy and better for you than butter and the animal fats. So this is just fraud. They just paid people off to lie, and they're like, yeah, whatever. Well, either they didn't realize how bad it was, or they just didn't give a shit. But like either way, they did it, and they just sold their integrity, um, and the food manufacturers, and then people started, oh, okay, Crisco, and they just started putting out ads, and you see these ads from the '60s going like, oh, the clean taste of cooking with Crisco. When I have my fried chicken, there's actually, I swear to God, I'm not just making that. There's actually like a southern sort of
They know
drawl.
what gets people to feel good. They hear that accent and it's like, oh, she cares about
Yeah,
me.
oh,
I'm going to
bless
buy
your
this.
heart. Yeah, exactly. It's just like very comforting and warm, and and then we have multiple examples of this, of the sugar companies, Sugar Research Foundation, who saw that there were studies coming out saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, or sorry, not cholesterol caused heart disease, but sugar was associated with the increase in heart disease, and then they came up with the idea that, or the accusation and the slur and the slander that cholesterol caused heart disease when it had never caused heart disease in the past, and we're eating far more meat in the 1800s than we were in the 1900s, and far more fat, far more animal fat. In fact, if you look at a graph of consumption of animal fats, not necessarily saturated fats, because we replaced some of the animal fats with plant fats that had saturated fats in them. So saturated fat is a sort of a wavy line, but more or less consistent throughout the 20th century and 21st century. And yet heart disease is going up. And yet heart disease didn't exist in the 1800s. So again, no correlation whatsoever. And you can't prove causation from correlation, even if things are tightly correlated. That doesn't prove causation. But it shows a correlation. You say, okay, well, let's investigate this. But if there's no correlation at all, if it's completely disconnected, that proves there's no causation, because there has to be a cause and effect. There has to be a correlation if there's a cause and effect relationship. If you remove the cause, the effect has to go away. So that has to be correlated. So saturated fat is steady, no correlation with heart disease. But animal fat in particular is actually inversely related to heart disease and cardiovascular disease. So we were eating a lot more of it in the early 1900s. And then as that came down over the 20th century, heart disease was going up. So it's actually an X-shaped curve. As animal fat reduces, heart disease goes up. So again, no correlation. In fact, an inverse correlation. If anything, you could say that it might be protective. And we do see this inverse association quite often. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's protective, but it could mean that the things that you're replacing it with are causative and are causing more of a harm. So those are the things you have to sort of look at. But you cannot say that animal fats are a cause of heart disease when there's an inverse correlation, right? And we see this again and again as we go. And again, after the 1970s, we reduced red meat, we reduced saturated fat, we've reduced animal fat, we've reduced cholesterol, we're taking medications to reduce cholesterol, and heart disease rates are going up. And so, we just keep seeing this. And so the only reason that we have this false idea that cholesterol causes heart disease when it's never caused heart disease, we always had cholesterol. We didn't just start making this in the 20th century. The same, and people say, well, conclusive proof of this is familial hypercholesterolemia. And is familial hypercholesterolemia. And said, well, when people have these really elevated, markedly elevated levels of LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol, they're just dying all over the place. Well, first of all, no, they're not. It's only a slight increased risk of cardiovascular disease and death from cardiovascular disease up to the fifth decade. And then from 50s onward, it's the same as the rest of the population. For some reason, down a bit in the people in their 70s for whatever reason. But then you look at the fact that people with familial hypercholesterolemia are more likely to have clotting disorders and more likely to clot, and which is like a stroke and a heart attack. Those are clots, right? And so when you're more prone to clotting, you're actually more prone to getting strokes and other sorts of problems, DVTs, these sorts of things, blockages in your vessels, in your vasculature, which is what a heart attack is, which is what a stroke is. Oftentimes, there's different kinds of strokes, but so that's the thing, is that when you separate out the people that have just the high cholesterol from ones that have high cholesterol, quote unquote high cholesterol, I think it's normal cholesterol, frankly. And of the higher LDL cholesterol and the clotting disorder, it's only the ones with the clotting disorder that have increased rates of heart disease. The ones that only have higher LDL, exactly the same risk of heart disease as the rest of the population, right? So again, no correlation. And there's the same number of people as a percentage of the population had familial hypercholesterolemia in the 1800s when there isn't a single reported case of death by heart disease in the entire century. So what happened there? If people understand population genetics, it's very simple. Peter Attia says that, well, if you understand math and statistics, you understand that cholesterol is causative, is a definite cause. Well, first of all, there's zero causative studies. There are zero studies that show cause and effect relationship between cholesterol and heart disease. Zero. And in fact, the randomized controlled trials that tried to look at this actually found the opposite. When you gave people linoleic acid and polyunsaturated seed oils and fats to lower LDL cholesterol, lower saturated fat, it did do that, and more people were dying of cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, and strokes, right? So again, no correlation, likely an inverse relationship. But if you understand genetics and population genetics, you'll understand that the percentage of an allele in the population stays consistent at that percentage, regardless of the population's growth or shrinkage, right? And so unless you have a major mass migration or a major death, like just a mass sort of extinction event where
like
most
a plague
people die
or
off.
something.
Like plague, something massive, where you're losing like half the population, like the Black Death, where 2/3 of Europe died, right? Something massive like that. That's going to change the genetic expression of alleles, right? And the percentage of them. And it's going to select for certain ones and not others. So in the 1800s, we didn't have any of those events. We had people immigrating into America and elsewhere, but mostly they were coming from Europe, and we don't see any records of people dying of heart attacks in Europe en masse either. And so you should have the same percentage of the population have familial hypercholesterolemia in the 1800s when there isn't a single reported death from heart disease on autopsy, right? So what happened, right? So if you understand statistics and you understand population genetics, you'll know that it cannot be cholesterol because there isn't even an association with cholesterol. This idea that cholesterol caused heart disease did not come up independently from a researcher that said, "Ooh, I think this is it." It was brought about by the sugar companies. They invented this, and then they found people like Ansel Keys and other professors from other prestigious universities like Harvard and elsewhere that were corrupt enough and corruptible enough that they could pay them off to push this narrative and just make that their life's work of just pushing and cranking down cholesterol as the cause of heart disease, when in their own documents they recognize that it's probably there. It's probably their product, and they needed to muddy the water. So that's not supposition, that's not conjecture, that's not somebody's blog post where they accused sugar companies of doing this. That's reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016, one of the top medical journals in the world, JAMA. And it's not just someone reporting this, it's the publication of the Sugar Research Foundation's own internal documents where they, in their own words, spelled this out. That they, in this particular publication in 2016, that it has internal memos detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies and opinion pieces saying that cholesterol caused heart disease when it was much more likely to be sugar, and to exonerate sugar, say it was safe. It was just an empty calorie. That's where that phrase comes from. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, saturated fat, increased cholesterol, stop eating both. And people did. Once it came from a top-down directive from the government saying, "Oh, these are the guidelines. This is what the government says," and the government's been so good to us for so long. Well, we've gotten a bit naive. We founded America based on the mistrust of people in power and the government, and we wanted to limit them and hold them accountable for the things that they do, and basically limit their power so that they really couldn't sell their power and influence. We had that for about 150 years. Then all of a sudden that the brakes and the restrictions started coming off with the Great Depression. Woodrow Wilson, FDR started opening things up, and we had special interests and lobbyists started coming in, because before that they couldn't sell their interests, they couldn't sell their power, because the federal government didn't have access to funds like they do now. They weren't allowed to use it for special interests until the 1930s. Now they can just give money to whoever for whatever reason that they want. And now everybody, hey, why don't I give you $1 million for your campaign, and you give my company $1 billion for this whatever special interest, or 100 million or millions and things like that. There's a massive return on investment. Some economists like Thomas Sowell have estimated that it's 1,000 to 1 return on investment lobbying politicians. That you pay them X amount, you'll get 1,000-fold back in taxpayer money. So we forgot that, and we got a bit comfortable in that things were working so well, and we just didn't see this corruption get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so all of a sudden in the late 1970s, 1980s, the government saying, "Stop eating cholesterol. Cholesterol causes heart disease." People are like, well, why would they lie? They wouldn't let people say. They wouldn't say that unless it was true. They wouldn't let them say that. And people hear this. Someone says something on TV. Well, they wouldn't let them say that on TV if it wasn't true. Who do you think is policing this, and how the hell would they know? How do they know who's the arbiter of truth? Is just someone in the government just knows everything?
Someone else getting paid.
That's it. Just we have Jesus in office, and obviously he knows who's lying and who's not, and he's not going to let that go on and all that sort of stuff. These are people, and people are corruptible, and power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so when you're talking about multi-billion, now multi-trillion-dollar industries, there's a lot of money to go around. I did a lecture at a conference just recently and talked about a lot of these sorts of things, the rise in the chronic disease rates, but also the rise in medical expenditures on these things. We are spending trillions of dollars treating these things. It's estimated about $13 to $14 trillion a year worldwide treating these so-called chronic diseases. these non-communicable chronic diseases. We spend over $2 trillion a year on respiratory diseases like COPD. We spend trillions on cancer and heart disease. Just the top five, just these top five, we spend around 13 to 14 trillion dollars a year treating this stuff, right? And then you're losing out on tens of trillions of dollars in lost production. It's estimated between 2010 and 2030 that we'll lose out on $47 trillion worth of productivity from people just being sick and not being able to just get on with their life and just live their normal life and just work or whatever. And then, another $20 trillion is going to be lost in that time period from, early death, right? So just from, lost production wise, that's obviously, no one's getting that money, that's just not being produced. But that $14 trillion a year, and that was just in 2010. It's estimated to go up much more than that by 2030. So those trillions of dollars every single year, those are going to buying products and pharmaceuticals and equipment and hospital stays and all these sorts of stuff. This is big, big, big business. And so people, companies, corporations, governments are receiving those trillions of dollars. And now there's trillions of dollars for your marketing campaign and your lobbyists to then go and push your agenda to make sure that people just keep getting sicker. And I think that's actually what's happening. There's a guy named Callie Means who's a whistleblower for the Big Food and Big Pharma. And he said that the the food companies know, the processed food companies know, which are all processed plant foods, which is why you're getting all this plant-based, because they're the ones putting out the studies on that. The sugar companies, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis, the Kellogg's, and all these sorts of things, they put out the vast majority of spending on nutritional research. And it's all going in one direction. Sugar's safe, seed oils are good, plant-based is the way to go because that's their products, right? And so we have to be skeptical of this sort of stuff. And they're also the ones, paying off politicians and all these sorts of things as well. So we have to be very careful about this. We have to be very mindful and careful and understand where this research is coming from and who are the people pulling the strings, and that all this money, these trillions of dollars, are going to big pharma and big manufacturers, and that's not even the cost for the food in the first place. We're spending trillions of dollars on this food that's making us sick, and then many multiples more trillions of dollars treating that illness. And Callie Means said that publicly, openly, that the food companies know that their food is making people sick, is causing metabolic disease and damage and cardiovascular disease and obesity and all these other things. And he said, and that they're happy about that because they then profit off the back end because they sell us these drugs and these metformins and the Ozempics and the statins and everything like that we use to treat these problems. And he said, I know they know this because I've been in the boardroom meetings with them when they said it. Right. And so,
he wrote a great thread on that on Twitter. Sorry to interrupt. He laid this whole story out, and I'll put it in the show notes because it's fascinating.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is. And it's something that people have suspected for a very long time and be like, they have to know. And of course they did know. We have this, this JAMA report from the sugar industry, from Sugar Research Foundation decades ago, talking about how they manufactured this crisis on heart disease in the first place, or on cholesterol and causing heart disease in the first place. They manufactured this, right? So did they just forget? Was it just one guy, and then they just everybody? That guy left, and he's no longer here anymore. No, of course they know, because when some people comes in, they replace one guy, they learn what's going on, they continue moving the machine. Then some guy gets replaced, and some woman comes in, and some other guy comes in, and it just replaces out, and you have all new pieces and players, but they're all playing the same game. They're all perpetuating the same system. And they were doing this for decades. They were paying off researchers and politicians and people for decades to push this narrative. And so, that's still going on. They know about this. We learned about the tobacco companies and how they were saying for decades, oh, no. tobacco is safe. It's not addictive. Our studies show that it doesn't cause cancer. It makes your hair grow and your teeth whiter and all this. I mean, they just made things up because but I have a study here. Oh, and that's what this said. Yeah, but you made up the study. It's a garbage study. And then they had leaked documents of their internal memos, like the JAMA memos from the sugar companies, showing that no, they damn well knew that this stuff was toxic and addictive and causing cancer, and they were lying about it, and they lied they perjured themselves in front of Congress. So they got like a $400 billion fine, I think it was. But who cares? I mean, they made trillions in that time, and people
Cost of
died
doing
because of that.
business.
Well, why the hell wasn't it a criminal charge? Why was it just civil? Why did they just get a penalty? They got away for 30 years or more putting out a product that they knew was killing people and causing cancer. How is that not at least manslaughter or reckless endangerment or murder? They're knowingly putting out a product that they know can kill people. And yet they're trying to market this to younger and younger and younger people. They're just drug dealers. These are just drug cartels. They're just legal drug cartels. It's the same exact tactics. You hook them young, you hook them early, and then you have a client for life. And that's what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to do that with tobacco. I mean, I remember as a kid, they had candy cigarettes. It was bubble gum with like a piece of paper wrapped around it, and they had powdered sugar in there. And you blow it, go like that, and this puff of powdered sugar would come out. I was like, oh, it's cool. Oh, it looks like I have a cigarette. And it was like, but why would you think that that's cool? They're trying to make it look cool and make kids think that smoking was cool. And that was actually the purpose. They leaked boardroom meetings as well from the sugar companies saying, hey, let's try to market this to kids and make candy cigarettes and things like that, so they'll think that cigarettes are cool and it's candy and it's great. They actually did that. And I saw it. I bought them once. And, I remember having them. And so, that is knowledge of forethought. They know what's going on. The sugar companies knew what was going on.
And there's so many layers to that too. Like they have the whole advertising campaigns of all this. They get all the celebrities in on it, doing smoking a cigarette on the commercial or on the newspaper or the magazine. And just the way that, in the word you use, is the system. It's this giant system of moving parts, and most of the people inside the system that are making this thing run are not evil people. Like, Calamine is a perfect example. He was in there and he was just kind of, doing his job, and until he realized, wait, this is terrible. I need to get out of here and tell people what's actually going on. Like, people have just little enough responsibility within that behemoth that they don't feel guilty about it. And they're able to rationalize, the world's crazy. Maybe this company isn't, the best, but I need to feed my family because it's rough out here and inflation is so bad, which then traces all the way back to the Federal Reserve printing the money and feeding this whole thing through the Cantillon effect in the first place. They're the one passing the money down into those corporations who have the lobbying interests involved. It's just a giant mess.
Yeah. And there's always something happened before. You can always go back further and further and further. But right now, what we're dealing with is multinational corporations, multi-trillion-dollar corporations in both the food and drug industry that are profiting greatly off of human suffering. And most people involved in that don't realize that. The people working on the drugs and coming up with things. I mean, a lot of these people are thinking like, wow, I'm doing such great things. I'm figuring out medications and treatments and treating new diseases and all these sorts of things. But it's a product development business. Goldman Sachs, there's a leaked meeting from Goldman Sachs, and in one of the slides it said, is it a viable business model to cure disease, right? Or should we just perpetuate and treat the symptoms of the disease so that people can live with the disorder, and then we own them for life, right? Instead of curing something and getting rid of it, we just perpetuate it. Chris Rock called this in the 90s. I remember this in one of his stand-up specials. He said that, they're not trying to cure disease. They just want you to live with disease, because they profit off of it, and they don't want to cure anything. When was the last time they cured anything, right? They're still pissed about polio, they cure that. They're like, damn it, we just dried up our resources, but it's true. It is exactly true. And I think it was Callie Means that said this, or someone else who sort of was saying about their experiences. I'm pretty sure it was Kelly Means. And there was a pharmaceutical executive that was just sort of asked a rhetorical question, say, hey, you know what my favorite drug is that our company makes? And we're like, oh, well, what? Something that cures cancer in babies, something nice like that. And like, no, my favorite drugs that our company produces are drugs that have side effects, that we have drugs that treat the side effects of. And so you have to be put on other things. He's like, I want to sell as many of these things as possible. And I want to sell drugs on top of drugs on top of drugs. These people are not our friends. We have to understand their motivations. Their motivations is to be profitable. And that's fine. But we need to understand that this is a product development marketplace. It doesn't work any better if the government does it, because guess what? The government wants money too. The government spends money too. It wants to save money. It wants to do things that earn it money, and it's using us as chattel and milking us and harvesting us every year with taxes. And they want to keep as much of that as possible, put that in their own pockets, put that in their friends' pockets, and be corrupt bastards. They're not trying to, oh, well, we'll handle it better than they will. We'll fund it. No, they're just giving them control of the purse strings, and then they're gonna blow it in their own way. So that doesn't work either. What works is people understanding the system. They understand the game. They understand that these people are not necessarily trying to make you well. They're trying to perpetuate a disease state and just treat you symptomatically, which is important, because sometimes that's vital, and sometimes that symptom management can actually save your life. Diabetes is a good example of this. Taking metformin, taking insulin, taking these sorts of things does actually benefit your health and your life. But that should be a short-term measure while you're addressing the underlying root cause, which is carbohydrate toxicity and seed oils and alcohol. Those are the things that are going to damage your body and cause insulin resistance and disruption of your normal workings of your metabolism, so that you can't function properly and your blood sugar starts going up and up and up and up and up, which will kill you eventually, because blood sugar that gets too high is toxic to your body. And it will eventually kill you. And this is why diabetics, their feet get amputated, their legs get amputated, their kidney function fails. They have to get transplants on dialysis.
They go blind. The diabetic retinopathy too.
Yeah. Exactly. They go blind and they die. Right. This is all from high blood sugar. Those glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules and are permanently damaging them. And that builds up and builds up and builds up, and it overwhelms our body's capacity to fix and repair these things. So, taking medication to keep your blood sugar down is great, but that's not addressing the underlying cause. So, using these medications when you need them is good. It's good that we have some of these things. Some of these things are completely superfluous, because these diseases shouldn't exist in the first place. If you have it, great. These medications are there to help you. These immune modulators that we have for autoimmunity, for autoimmune diseases, great. That's really good that they help people not have bloody diarrhea 30 times a day, and their joints decay and break down and be in horrible pain, and their fingers and hands get deformed and mutilated from rheumatoid arthritis. But we are now seeing people put their autoimmunity into remission by changing their diet and going on to a strict elimination diet of really just meat and water, best with red meat and water. And that's eliminating out the things your body's attacking in the first place. It's making antibodies towards these plant toxins, these different artificial chemicals and inflammatory factors that are coming in the food that we're eating that's not meat. And reacting to that, causing it to make antibodies, and you're getting cross-reactivity with your own body, and that's autoimmunity. And that seems to be what happens. And when we eliminate these things from our diet, I see in clinical practice, those antibody levels come down and then go to undetectable, and they essentially don't have this disease process anymore, and unless they eat this stuff again, and it shoots right back up, right? So that's a cause and effect relationship. We removed the cause or the suspected cause, and the effect went away. Okay, well, that's step one. Now we reintroduce what we think is the cause. And look at that, boom, the effect comes right back, right? So that's a cause and effect relationship. And so, you can use medications to help you throughout a hard time, but once you recognize what the cause is and you can eliminate that, that's what you do. That's the main thing, and that doesn't pay the bills in the pharmaceutical industry, because there's nothing to sell there, right? And it's not selling their nasty food products. They're causing the diseases, and then they're selling trillions of dollars worth of medications and treatments and things like that. So this is a multi-trillion dollar endeavor and business. And they have trillions of dollars to play around with their research fund, which is not real research. They're just putting out propaganda. It's really part of their marketing budget, is putting out fake studies that make it look like their product is better than it is, right? And make it look like the alternative is worse than it is, or bad in the first place. Meat is not bad. There's nothing in meat that is harmful to you. The WHO, which is definitely a victim of corporate capture, one of the, I think maybe the head of WHO or someone up there said that, nearly 80% of the money of the funding that WHO get comes with strings attached. And so it's just like, this is just what it is, and we have to pay homage to our overlords, right? But on the WHO's website, they have a page that goes through the natural toxins found in food, right? And you go through there's plant toxins, and there's mushroom toxins, and there's algae toxins. And curiously, there isn't a single mention of any toxin that exists in meat, not even cholesterol. They didn't say nothing. There's nothing, right? So there's no toxins in meat. And why would there be? There doesn't need to be. Maybe an animal has a poison sac, or exudes some toxin on its skin, like a tree frog, or like some sort of Amazon frog or something like that. But the meat itself doesn't need to be isn't poisonous because it doesn't need to be poisonous, right? So a cow is a big animal, and a buffalo, a bison is a big animal. Of the 5 top killers of humans, animals that kill humans in Africa, 4 of those are herbivores, right? Only 1 is lions, right? So, you have Cape buffalo, elephants, rhinos, hippos, and then lions, right? So these herbivores are dangerous, and they are very able and capable of protecting themselves. You get too near to them, they look at you as a threat. They will kill you. It happens all the time. People, get videos of these people
Hippos
being attacked.
are gnarly.
Very, very
They
aggressive.
fuck people up.
Absolutely, and they mess up lions too. I mean, they're just big, strong, fierce, aggressive animals because they have to be, because it's kill or be killed, right? And so if you're not aggressive, you're not fighting back, you're getting killed. And so, we see that, and so, the idea that they're defenseless and they would have to be poisonous. So a lion eats a hippo because they're just this defenseless little weak creature, but the meat is toxic. It doesn't need to be toxic. The hippo is dangerous. Its meat doesn't need to be dangerous, right? And so, that's the point. Plants do have to be toxic because they're stationary. They can't run away or fight back. They can't mess up a lion like a hippo can. They're just sitting there. They're just sitting ducks, right? And so they have to be toxic. So there is nothing inherent in meat that is toxic. This is meat, right? This is our own body is meat. Our body is made out of animal tissue because we are animal. And so it's very easy to turn animal tissue into more animal tissue. It's actually really difficult to turn plant tissue into animal tissue. And not every animal is equipped at it. That's why 70% of animal species are carnivores, right? Because they don't have the ability to turn plants into animals. They have to eat other animals that are already animals, right? And so, that's the thing. There is nothing inherent in meat that is harmful to you. And then they'll say cholesterol. It's complete bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit.
I'm hearing people saying like, oh, what about like, don't they like inject bad hormones into it? But I've heard many times that that's really overblown, and it's really just the hormones that are already in that animal in a tiny amount, so it's not even significant. So people don't really need to worry about that, right?
Yeah, well, and the thing is too is that it's real easy. You say, well, but they inject this, and then you burn steak, and that's carcinogen. Okay, so don't get the ones with injections, and don't burn your steak. It's real easy. So even they are admitting that there's nothing in the steak that's causing a problem. It's something that you do to it.
It's a man-made
could cause a problem.
thing.
Or processed meat. That's carcinogenic. Well, what's processed? It means you've done something to it. You've changed something to it. So why is unprocessed meat not a carcinogen? But processed meat are carcinogens because you added a bunch of plants and artificial ingredients to it. And also it's bullshit. That was complete and utter crap too. The WHO only reported on 30 or so studies, and they omitted 800, right? And those sort of studies were poorly designed junk studies that had a very weak correlation, like an 18% increased relative risk. If you're looking at epidemiological junk studies, you don't even pay attention to it unless it's over 200%. That's a rule of statistics. You don't waste your time. And they just completely ignored that and just said, oh, look at this, it increases risk of colon cancer, things like that. No, it doesn't, because all those other 800 studies showed the exact opposite. There was no relationship between eating meat, and especially unprocessed red meat, and cancer, colon cancer or otherwise. So it was fraud. And in fact, a lot of the people that were on there were vegans, vegetarians, and Seventh-day Adventist church members who are religiously anti-meat. And some of the other people that were on this, it was just a work group. It wasn't like they did studies or something like that. They just did a literature review, and they made a decision on what they were going to say. And there were other people on that. And one of the guys on that panel said that was the most difficult thing that he'd ever have to experience in his professional career, because he saw hundreds of high quality, good studies be thrown out because they didn't push the narrative that they wanted in favor of really crappy studies that did. And he said, hey, you guys need to declare your bias. You're vegetarians, vegans, and Seventh-day Adventist members. You need to declare your bias and say that this is where you're coming from. And they've refused, right? So the University of Washington published a year or 2 years ago an actual massive study, literature review, looking at over 800 studies, and found that the ones that connected meat with cancer, very tenuously, by the way, were just, and in their words, junk studies, and just garbage science. So this was that the better studies showed absolutely no relationship between red meat and cancer, or even processed meat and cancer. But again, if you process meat and you think that this is causing harm, well, then you're adding something to it, right? So no matter where they go, they can't say, hey, look, this in meat, this causes harm, and here's the proof, right? It's something has been done to it. You've burnt it, or you've added hormones to it, or something like that. But to your question about the hormones, in economics, which I wish everyone would study, there's this idea of compared to what? Well, look at this. The GDP is okay. Compared to what? Right? You need to have a frame of reference. You need to have something to compare it against. And so that's the same with hormones. And they'll say that. And I've had patients who their doctors, their oncologists, have said, don't eat red meat because of all the hormones in it. It has all this estrogen in it, and you can't do that because you have an estrogen sensitive tumor. And so you need to just get rid of all this sort of stuff. So what do you do instead? You eat plant-based proteins instead, things like soy. That's a major source of plant protein is
just
soy.
Just a block
protein.
of chemicals will be just fine.
Yeah, exactly. And so what they don't realize,
sludge.
because they've been brainwashed, is that when you give growth hormones and things like that to cows as they're growing, or steers really, that yes, it can increase their estrogen levels. It actually doubles it, nearly doubles it. It goes from 2 nanograms for 3 ounces of lean untreated meat is 2 nanograms of estrogen. And then in hormone treated meat, 3 ounces lean is about 3.9, right? So it's nearly double, right? That's technically correct. And so they say, look, it has double the hormones. Oh my God. They just use this. So, okay, but compared to what? Where does that fit in everything? Well, first of all, 3 ounces of cabbage have about 400 nanograms of estrogen, phytoestrogens, because plants make hormone disruptors as well. They make phytoestrogens and things that can bind to estrogen receptors and either turn them off or block them from your body using them. Either way, it's disrupting your hormones. It's stopping your body from working normally. So for 2 nanograms in untreated meat, 4 nanograms, 3.9 nanograms in hormone treated meat, 400 nanograms in cabbage, 35,000 nanograms in a birth control pill, 180,000 nanograms in that a fertile woman would make in a day, one day, right? And over 1 million nanograms of phytoestrogens in 3 ounces of soy. So compared to what? right? Compared to what you make in a day, it's infinitesimal, the amount of estrogen that you're going to get from eating meat or red meat or even hormone treated meat. Compared to the alternative, what you replace it with. You have to think past step one. Okay, well, this has estrogen. We don't want that. Okay, great. We've gotten rid of that. Job done. No, because what do you replace it with? What do you do next? What's the next step? Okay, well, I need to get protein still. What's a good source of protein? Well, everyone says soy. Okay, well, do soy. Okay, well, what does soy have in it? Oh, shit, it has more. Okay, so that's bad. Okay, now what do you do next? It's just like you have to think down the track. What's going to happen if you eliminate one thing? Something else is going to replace it. Is that better or worse? Right? In this case, it's worse, much worse. First of all, just from the estrogen standpoint, but also because it's just devoid of nutrients and has nothing close to the nutrient profile that meat has. And it has a far worse toxic profile than meat has because meat doesn't have a toxic profile as per the WHO, right? And so that's the thing that people don't realize is that this is pure propaganda. There is nothing in meat that causes harm. And they're just trying to manipulate statistics. They're trying to manipulate and drum up fear and for their own profit, either for because Procter and Gamble's paying off the American Heart Association, or the sugar companies paying off Ansel Keys and others, and heads of the USDA and AHA, throughout the 20th century, because the Seventh Day Adventists think that it's a sin to eat meat, and they started Kellogg cereals. They own Sanitarium Foods, which is the number one cereal company in Australia. They make Wheat Bix. If everyone eats that nasty, miserable stuff, that's who this comes
Awful.
from. Awful stuff, and they still enjoy tax exempt status. There's tax free status. They don't pay taxes, right? Because this is owned by a church. And to my knowledge, they started like 20 other cereal companies as well. And so, the Seventh-day Adventists founded, or Seventh-day Adventist church members founded, the American Nutrition and Dietetics Association. They're the major funders through Sanitarium Foods and other cereal companies of the nutritional bodies in various countries, like the Australian Dietetics Association, which is why the Australian Dietetics Association for a long time had, and probably still up, a page on how great a vegan diet is. Oh, it's so wonderful. It's so great. I mean, yeah, you do have to worry about iron and zinc and selenium and B12 and B6 and B7 and this, and it's just going down the list of all these nutrients and everything that you are just not going to get in sufficient quantities on a vegan diet. But if you account for those, oh, it's perfect. It's wonderful. It's amazing. It's like, okay, apart from all the problems it has, it's great. It's like, what kind of nonsense is that? And what kind of person can call themselves a nutritionist that promotes and supports a diet that is devoid in nutrients? How can they support that? How can you say this is a good diet if it's devoid of nutrients, and you can call yourself a nutritionist with a straight face? I mean, you're just a shill and a fraud, and you may not even realize it, but you are. And of course, they are paid off by the Sanitarium Foods. And in fact, the resources links that they had to support the claims of plant-based foods being so great were either written by Sanitarium Foods directly or Seventh-day Adventist church members. It's kind of cute, right? So, and then they said, oh, ketogenic diets. Oh, there's no information that says that this is good. Oh, this could be very dangerous and all this sort of stuff. They had to take that down now because ketogenic diets are actually in the national schedule and guidelines for treating diabetes in Australia, because it's been clinically proven in humans, in human trials, to be able to reverse diabetes by putting people on a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet. But before that, they had this whole page about how this is dangerous. Oh, well, it wasn't any good. There are thousands of studies, thousands of interventional trials on ketogenic diets, like a carnivore diet, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But you replace, again, what do you replace it with? You stop eating carbs, you replace it with meat and fat, animal fat in particular. And in fact, the ones that replace out the seed oils and replace those with animal fats, those are ones that do better in these different trials. And so for diabetes reversal and otherwise, even though you get rid of all the carbs and everything, getting rid of the seed oils is very important. And so seed oils can independently cause insulin resistance. They can cause mitochondrial disruption. They can cause all sorts of problems in the body and the metabolism. So, we have thousands of studies on ketogenic diets. It is the most robustly studied diet on earth, right? And in fact, I was speaking to Dr. Robert Sivas, and he was saying it's the only studied diet that's been studied on earth. All the vegan diets and vegetarian diets, there's the nutritional epidemiology, which is the lowest of the low, right? They said like the nurses study showed this. Anybody who quotes a nurses study, is a fraud. That they don't know what the hell they're talking about, or they do know what they're talking about.
What is a nurses
trying to
study?
mislead you. The nurses study is basically they have a whole bunch of nurses, and every year they send them out a flyer. One thing every year. They get it once a year, and they have to fill out this questionnaire. And it says, what have you eaten in the last 365 days for every single meal? How the hell would you know that? How could you possibly be able to replicate that? So completely flawed, just right off the bat. I mean, no one's going to be able to remember every single meal that they've had in the last calendar year, except me. It's meat every single time. But I'm not going to know how much. I didn't measure it out, weigh it out. It's how many calories did I get? How many grams of this and that did I get? I have no idea. I know it was meat. I know that about 99% of it was beef, but that's it, and so even I wouldn't be able to figure that out. And people just eating all over the shop, and nurses just sitting there just slamming chocolates and things like that, at the hospital. Like, I mean, how do you know? How do you know how many chocolates that you've had? Or which days you had those chocolates or whatever. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So that's what the nurses study is. It's garbage. That's what all these nutritional epidemiology studies are. They're garbage. They send you out a flyer and a questionnaire that says, what have you eaten in the last year? It's not interventional. It's not experimental. It would only be thesis forming at best, right? You can't show any cause and effect relationship, but it's also garbage because it's not best. You cannot gain any real information from this because you're relying on people's memories over the past year on what they ate, right? It's not going to work. So people can misreport, they can misremember, and in fact, we see this a lot of the studies. There was this stupid study that they said, eating more meat, causes diabetes. Well, first of all, again, this is a survey that you're asking people, and so there's no cause and effect established. You cannot show that. You're looking at it, and there's so many flaws in this. You got this handout once a year, and you're trying to figure out everything, and then from their self-reported eating habits, the females in the study ate more calories on a daily basis on average than the men, but they all ate like very little, far below like a 2,000 calorie normal daily caloric intake, right? But the women, for the first time in history, were eating more than men, right? So and they were all eating just basically starvation ration. Oh well, we corrected for that. Well, what do you do when you correct something? You're changing the data. You're changing the raw data. You're manipulating it. And this is why people talk about the age-adjusted mortality rates for cardiovascular disease. Anything age-adjusted, you've changed and manipulated the data. So you always have to take that with a grain of salt, first of all. What's the raw data? What does that say? Okay, something completely weird and different. You look at that and go like, well, that's clearly false. This is clearly wrong. This is clearly junk. We don't need to look at this. This is flawed data. But they also included in things. So this is another way they do things. They manipulate the data. They'll say, okay, how many times did you eat pizza? How many times did you eat lasagna? How many times did you eat fast food? Just any times, just fast food, not meat in a fast food, but like just fast food. So, I mean, you could get a veggie burger with fries deep fried in seed oils and a sugary drink, with a bunch of, fructose and things like that in it, and high fructose corn syrup. And that's considered meat because any fast food, because, one of the ingredients could be meat, therefore it's meat. And sandwiches are meat. What? Just all sandwiches. Every sandwich is meat, like every part of every sandwich is meat. Pizza
The one, yeah,
is
I
meat.
was waiting for pizza like that. They
Yeah,
literally count that as meat just because it might have meat on the
might
pizza.
have meat.
It's
But
crazy.
even when it does have meat, the majority of it is not meat and not even dairy. The majority
Right.
of it is bread, sauce, and depending on your topping. But the majority of it is bread, right? So this is fraud. This is just fraud, pure, plain and simple. So when we look at these things, say, "Oh, look at this." When people that self-report with their flawed memory what they've eaten for the last year, the last 2 years, the ones that report eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, they do better than the ones eating more meat. Well, we've already established that the junk food in those equations are being termed meat. They're not just junk food, right? And these fraudulent studies, because they have a narrative. They're trying to push an agenda. Walter Willett at Harvard is a vegan. He pushes vegan ideology, and he has strong ties with the Seventh-day Adventist Church and financial ties with big food and drug corporations, right? He is completely conflicted. And same with Dr. Gardner from Stanford, completely conflicted both financially and ideologically, because he is a self-professed vegan. And I saw a quote from him, maybe it's falsely attributed to him, but maybe not. But it said that he wasn't vegan because of health reasons. He just liked being part of that community. And so this is an ideology, right? And
And
so they
that's
want to,
that's like almost across the board for pretty much all of them. I mean, it's
yeah.
I mean, we're both Seattle guys.
Mhm.
We've been around a lot of
Mm.
vegans.
Yeah. Well, dude,
And it's so
oh, sorry, go
common.
on. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Bastyr University in Kirkland. Have you heard of that?
Bastille, I haven't. I know Kirkland now.
So in Kirkland, so it's in North Kirkland. It's up by, I think it's up by like Kenmore or something like that. Anyway, it's like
Mhm.
sort of right on the water, right on Lake Washington, but it's in Kirkland, sort of northern Kirkland, right? And um, that is one of the top nutrition graduate schools in America. They're top ranked for their like graduate nutrition programs, and I think they do naturopath stuff as well. But I know they do nutrition. It is all raw food, plant based, raw food, plant based, raw food, plant based. You know, and I met people from Bastyr, and they were getting their PhDs in nutrition at this top ranked university for it. And it's just like, oh, you have to be raw food, vegan, this and the other. And I was just like, sure, okay, like you can't even get B12 from that, right? I mean, it's like, and so I just, in the back of my head, I was just like, well, that's obviously absurd. But it never dawned on me, like, why the hell is one of the top nutrition programs, PhD nutrition programs in the country, pushing a diet, or thinking that the best diet for humans is one that doesn't even account for basic nutrients? What the hell is going on there? Obviously, something. Obviously, that there's the curriculum has been corrupted, and the minds of these people have been corrupted. They're just trying to learn nutrition. I want to be a nutritionist. I want to, eat healthy and help people be healthy through diet. Great, love the motivation. And then they go in there and they just absolutely just sold a bunch of snake oil, and they come out going, oh yeah, be plant based. My friend Dr. Sarah Zaldivar, she got a PhD in nutrition and nutritional sciences, and she was applying everything she learned. I mean, she's one of the most educated people in nutrition, and she's just like, and she's gaining weight, she's getting sicker, she's not doing well. She's like, what the hell is going on? And then she started looking into this deeper and went, Christ, I was completely lied to, like my whole education. And so she was able to undo that, and she did the exact opposite of what she was taught in her degree, which is, it's an expensive lesson on the corruption of the world, that you have to pay all this money to get a PhD in a field that you now look at and go, well, that was a complete lie. That was a complete and utter lie, and so it's interesting. But she looked at that, she just did the exact opposite of what she was told, and she became slimmer and healthier and improved her life much better. So, it's interesting to me that more people can't see that. That more people can't see, like, hey, why are we pushing just plants and saying no meat at all, and that's the best, if we can't even get basic nutrients from it? That should be a massive warning flag. More and more people are coming to see this, but they're again trillions of dollars behind keeping us ignorant and keeping us beholden to this system of eating crap that makes us sick, and then buying the medicines that stabilize our sickness and keep it at a chronic level, so that we never get better, but we're slowly to the point that we can at least live a somewhat normal life. That is no way to live. It's not about survival. It's about thriving and enjoying your life, having your family enjoy their life, having your parents who've worked hard their entire lives be able to enjoy their retirement and not just be, just work until they're just so sick they have to stop and then they die. I mean, what a terrible, terrible state of affairs that we're in right now, where people they work their whole lives off, they slave and toil for these bastards and pay taxes their whole life, and then they don't even get to enjoy it, and they couldn't really enjoy it while they were doing it because there's such onerous taxes and bills, and the cost of living has just gone up and up and up and up and up. It's just soared up, since the 1970s, and it's more and more difficult to just have a normal life, financially and otherwise. And then you get to a point where you can retire, if you can retire, and you're so sick you can't even enjoy it. You can't just enjoy your life. That pisses me off. And so, just getting people healthy again and getting them out of that system and away from these evil bastards that are just trying to profit off of people's illness. That's what we need to do. And so it's not going to come from top down. There's too many trillions of dollars invested in this, both from an industry point of view and also a government point of view. So many people are paid off, and so many people have, their campaign funding comes from these people. We're never going to get it from top down unless we get our own politicians in pushing this agenda. But really what needs to happen is from a bottom up, ground up movement. More conversations like this, more people thinking and using their brain for a second, going, wait a minute, this is a bit off. This is different than what they've told us. And that doesn't make sense, that there were no heart attacks in the whole 1800s or before, except for that one-off in the late 1700s. And yet now this is the major killer. And we were eating more meat in 1912 when the first heart attack was reported. We're eating more then than we were in 1930s when this became the number one killer. In fact, in the 1920s and 1930s, that was a trough. We were eating the least amount of meat in America than we were in 200 years. There's a U-shaped curve because there's a vegetarian movement in the 1800s for the puritanical movement, the temperance movement, where they said, masturbation is the greatest of sins, sex is the greatest of sins. They didn't even differentiate out of wedlock. John Harvey Kellogg, who made Kellogg cereals, he was a Seventh-day Adventist member. The guy was so just like, sex is so evil, lust is so evil. He didn't even have sex with his wife, and they were married for like 50 years. He didn't have sex with her once, right? But he gave himself 2 high-powered enemas a day. That's a thing, right? You look that up. He invented a machine that would pump in 60 liters, or I think it was 60 liters of fluid in and out of his colon in 60 seconds. He did that twice a day, right? Probably because he's just bunged up with all this fiber and garbage, and he just wouldn't be able to pass a bowel motion otherwise, but very strange people. And so the whole vegetarian push started in the early 1800s, saying, hey, if you eat a bland plant-based diet, you'll suppress your sexual urges, and these sexual urges, this lust is a sin. And so this is obviously the devil trying to work through us, and so this will press it down. And you go to the Garden of Eden diet, and you're just eating plants and apples. Apparently, that's a good thing in Garden of Eden. And that will suppress your sexual urges. Well, if you have animals and they lose interest in reproduction and copulation, sex, they're unhealthy. And as populations become less healthy, they're less interested in sex, less interested in reproduction, right? So that's what's happening. Your sexual reproduction status, your sexual drive, your libido is directly tied up in your hormonal health and your overall health. If you're unwell and your hormones are out of balance, which is, then your body is just not going to be interested in reproduction, saying, look, you're not healthy enough to reproduce. You're not healthy enough to survive a pregnancy and raise a child. This is off the table, right? Which is why plants, that's one of their major defense mechanisms, is screwing with your hormones. It's just try to make you unwell and not be able to reproduce so that you're sick, so that you can't make more little cretins to go around and eat that plant, right? And so they're saying eat a whole bunch of plants because it suppresses your sexual urges and desires. What is that doing? That is making you less healthy, and that's why you're losing these sexual urges, right? And that's something that they didn't actually think about at the time. They just said lust is a sin, so we need to suppress it. But that's why. And then so the vegetarian movement, meat was coming down, 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 down. 20s and 30s, it was at the low point in 200 years, and then it started slowly coming up after that. But you look at that U-shaped curve. During that time, we were eating far more meat. Before the low point is when this became the number one killer in America. And then meat consumption went up, and then heart disease went up. Oh, look at this direct correlation. Yeah, look before that. There's no correlation. It wasn't connected at all, right? And we're eating far more meat. So when people start looking at this and understanding this, it's very simple. Same number of people as a percentage of the population had familial hypercholesterolemia, and yet no heart attacks or reported deaths from heart attacks in the 1800s. Why is that? They would be dying if this is direct cause. LDL equals heart disease. Why didn't we see any of this? Why would we make LDL if it was so toxic at physiological levels? If you just leave yourself alone and eat what we've been eating for millions of years, why would we make a physiologically damaging amount of LDL? We don't make that with glucose. Under a certain point, we can handle glucose. Above that point, it's toxic to the body, right? But we don't make it at a toxic level unless something's wrong, right? Or we've eaten more carbohydrates than we need to. Then it goes up. So if you're just eating your natural diet and just letting your body do its thing, your LDL should be at normal physiological levels. I say, well, but meat makes it go up. Fat makes it go up. Well, you can argue that, but you'd be wrong. Because if you just fast and you don't eat anything, your LDL goes up, right? And so you just don't eat for 5 days. Test your if you're just on a normal standard diet where you're eating carbohydrates and all that garbage, take your cholesterol now, and then don't eat for 5 days. Check it again. It'll be way higher, way higher. So that's our body just on its own accord, just making LDL. It's not being influenced by the carbs. It's not being influenced by the seed oils. It's not being influenced by the meat, saturated fat, or anything else. It is just doing its thing, right? And so our body's not going to physiologically make the product of our own design, right? Or of our own demise, right? It's not going to make a bunch of poisons and toxins to just kill us. I mean, good thing these guys figured it out now, because obviously we just would never have made it as a species if they didn't figure out that our bodies are making all this massively toxic amount of cholesterol that's just killing us from the inside out, even though it never did before. It's only doing that now. How can an ancient diet cause a new disease? How can ancient genetics cause new diseases? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't even pass the smell test. So the only reason people believe any of this crap is because it's been repeated and repeated and repeated so many times by so many people in so many directions by so many authorities for so many decades. But it's crap. And you look at the origins of that and you realize this was never a serious theory or discovery by any serious independent scientist. This came directly from the sugar companies in order to paint the blame somewhere else. And that's what it is. And when you figure that out, things make a lot more sense, and our bodies work a lot better as well. You see that, you try it out for yourself. A month or two, people will go like, I had no idea I could feel like this. This has reversed so many of my issues. My problems are going away. I get messages daily. I mean, by the hundreds of people saying that you literally saved my life. I mean, I didn't do anything.
I've seen them. I've read your comment sections on YouTube.
Well,
They're everywhere.
It's very humbling and flattering. I didn't do anything. I'm just putting this information out there. People have to do this themselves, and they have to be brave enough to say, I'm going to give this a try, because it does go against 50 years of the official narrative, right? But it works, and people do this, and like, my God, this is helping me. This is saving my life. This is doing all these amazing things, and so we know it works. we see this firsthand. And so we just need to get this out to more and more people. We see this in clinical trials. Like I said, ketogenic diet is the most studied diet on earth. It's the most robustly studied diet on earth with different specific health outcomes. We know that it reverses diabetes. We've seen it reverse and put into remission Crohn's disease and other autoimmune diseases. We've seen it with so many of epilepsy, 100 years of clinical.
Basically every mental problem ever that has to do with your brain, because your brain is 70+% fat, and when people aren't giving it that, it's going to go haywire in some way or another. So they're just an endless list. And I mean, the brain is so complex. And I mean, why am I talking here? You're the brain guy. We didn't even get to what you're actually doing now. But yeah, I mean, and that's one of the biggest benefits I felt myself, was that my mental clarity got way better when I just stopped eating all the plants.
Yeah.
And that was just, whoa, this is weird.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people see that. A lot of people have, brain fog goes away. Your brain's running on ketones now, which is your brain's primary energy source. People say you have to have glucose to run your brain. That's not true. 2/3 of your brain preferentially runs on ketones. First of all, you'll make blood sugar. You don't have to eat sugar or carbs to have blood sugar. You make it. Again, physiological levels that are safe for you, right? And so you'll have carbs available. You'll have blood sugar and glycogen available, right? But you'll also have ketones available. And when you have ketones and blood sugar available, your brain only runs on the ketones, 2/3 of your brain anyway. Some cells still run on glucose, but these ones prefer ketones. They have glucose available and it chooses ketones. That's a preference, right? So that means that's its primary energy source. It's only when those ketone levels start going down that it starts filling in the gaps with glucose. So that's a preference. And so now your brain is running on ketones, which is its preferred energy source. Same with your heart as well. Your heart beats better and stronger on ketones. And your other organs, a lot of these things like your enterocytes in your intestines, they prefer ketones as well. You have to eat fiber because it makes these short chain fatty acids in very small amounts, and that's the best food for your enterocytes. Yeah, same things are called ketones, right? It's like these butyrate and butyric acid. It's where butter gets its name, by the way, because it has so much of it. And we make it. That's one of the main ketone bodies. So it's the same thing as these short chain fatty acids that get fermented from fiber and feed your enterocytes. But again, just like your brain, it may prefer these ketones and short chain fatty acids, but they can absolutely run on glucose, because people that aren't eating any fiber and aren't in ketosis, their intestines don't rot out of their body and die. Right? So obviously they are able to run on glucose and other means. So it's just a preference. So your body prefers all these things. Your brain prefers these things. You're also getting rid of a lot of these neurotoxins and things that can slow down and damage your brain. A lot of these seed oils are very toxic to your brain. A linoleic acid breaks down, causes a lot of oxidative stress in your brain. That can cause problems. Different sorts of plant chemicals can damage your mitochondria. Slows down the energy dynamics and production capabilities of the mitochondria in your brain and the rest of your body. Slows down your brain, makes it work incorrectly. You're getting slow or delayed signals to other parts of your brain, and you can all of a sudden start manifesting psychiatric illnesses like schizophrenia or major depression. And you remove these things that are toxic to the brain, and then you lower your blood sugar, which lowers your insulin. Insulin has over 100 different effects on your body. Only one of them is blood sugar control. And when your blood sugar goes up and your insulin goes up correspondingly, because to try to detoxify that and get that down below the toxic level in your blood, well, insulin's going up and it's affecting all the other things too. So it has 100 different effects, and you're raising it artificially for one thing, and it's addressing that one thing, but now it's inappropriately affecting all these other things. And one of those things is shutting down your body's ability to go through autophagy or mitophagy, turn over these older cells, turn over these older mitochondria and make new ones and make better ones. That you don't need to do that from fasting. Oh, you have to fast to get through autophagy. No, you need to lower your insulin to go through autophagy. And if you just don't eat carbs, you're always in that state. You're always in that correct metabolic state where your body can turn itself over and heal and repair. And you also make more mitochondria. So after 3-4 months on ketogenic diet, like a carnivore diet, it's been found that you'll have 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective. And this is thought from people such as Professor Chris Palmer, psychiatrist at Harvard, and Dr. Georgia Ede, to be a major driver of psychiatric illnesses as metabolic disorder, damaged mitochondria and damaged metabolic functioning of your brain and nervous system that will manifest itself as psychiatric issues in susceptible people. So it's absolutely wild how much this affects people and how much food affects. And of course it does. You're putting in chemicals in your body. We are not a combustion engine. Oh, it's just calories in, calories out. That may work for a steam locomotive, right? The amount of calories you throw into the combustion furnace, and that heats water in a boiler, and it converts that into energy, into locomotive energy. That is not the case for us. We don't have any fire or furnace in our stomach. We are chemical factories. We put chemicals in our body. They have chemical reactions in our body, and so it's just nonsense when you understand that. Carbohydrates are complex organic molecules that have different, unique chemical interactions in your body, and they can have different hormonal reactions in your body. They'll all raise insulin, but fructose on its own will interrupt other hormones as well, such as leptin, which is the satiety hormone, and upregulate ghrelin, which is this hunger hormone. So you feel more hungry and less satiated, and you overeat. And it also is addictive. It gives a dopamine hit to the brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth, right? So that's different. You get your calories from fructose. That's different from getting your calories from glucose, and they're both carbohydrates. And if you get your calories from amino acids, that's different too, because you don't use amino acids for energy largely. You use it as building blocks and materials for the molecules that your DNA is coding for. And then fats as well. 70% of your brain, 60-70% of your brain is made out of fat. 20% of that fat is DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid that only exists in animals. It doesn't exist in plants. Well, there's omega-3s in plants. Wrong kind. That's ALA, and we don't convert that into DHA or EPA very well. In fact, some studies show that you give somebody a lot of ALA, it may increase your EPA, but it drops your DHA, and vice versa sometimes. So it's not clear at all that you can get enough of these essential fatty acids from the omega-3s that exist in plants at all. And some people would argue you can't at all. And so, this is this is required. You have to eat this stuff, and for meat. So, those are being used as structural components. They're not just being used for energy, right? And so, the idea that everything boils down to the amount of heat that escapes when you burn something is ludicrous. Okay, wood has calories. Eat some wood. What does that do for you? Is that calories in, calories out? You're taking in calories. It's not doing anything for you because we're not a combustion engine, right? You have a glass of water at room temperature. That has X amount of calories. You have a glass of water next to it at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. That has Y amount of calories. It has more calories than the room temperature water, right? So are you going to gain weight? You're going to put on fat by drinking the warm water instead of the cold water? Is that a thing? Are people saying that? It's more calories, right? So, that's the sort of the absurdity of this. And so, I guess you could argue that if you really chilled yourself up, you'd have to generate more heat energy and sort of offset that, and you'd use some of your energy stores to generate that. You could say that, but that's what that's the idea there. Are you going to store fat from that heat energy? No. If you just drank warm water every day or hot water every day, that would not supply your caloric demands. That would not supply your energy demands for your body. You'd just be warm, right? But you would not be able to function normally, right? You wouldn't get the chemical energy your body needs. So you're not going to live on just warmth. If you're just getting 2,000 calories from sitting in the sun and soaking in a hot tub and drinking warm water, no, that's not the same thing. This is chemical energy derived from food. Also, just to go on another tangent, again, I apologize to everybody bearing with me, but
no apologies here. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it just bugs the hell out of me with the whole calories in, calories out things. Oh, there's more calories equals more weight. Well, we've already established that's retarded. But the thing with calories in grams, right? So there's 9 calories per gram of fat, 4 calories per gram of protein and carbs. Well, we've already established that a lot of these things are used as building blocks of materials, especially with protein. And when protein is being used as energy instead of a building block, it doesn't get for useful calories. It's probably less than that, and because it has to be processed, and so you actually lose a bit of the energy. So it would be more estimated around 3.3, 3.4 calories per gram. But let's just call it 4. And again, calories are a bit useless, but 4 calories per gram versus 9 calories per gram. Oh my God, there's more calories. Ooh, that means you're going to store that energy. You don't need all that energy, and you're going to store that as fat, and fat has weight, and therefore you're going to get fat and you're going to weigh more. But again, calories don't have weight. Atoms have weight. Matter has weight. Grams have weight, right? So it's 9 calories per gram. That's the only part of that equation that has any weight measure. The calories don't. That's heat energy. Grams is weight, mass, right? So flip that around. 1 gram per 9 calories for fat, or 2.2 grams per 9 calories for carbs and protein. So there's more weight to get the same amount of energy. So if you want 2,000 calories a day, which is, again, useless, calories are useless, but let's say you'd have to eat twice as many grams, twice as much weight to get those calories, that energy from carbs and protein. So actually, wouldn't it make sense that if you wanted to lose weight, you'd want more energy dense material that has less weight? You're bringing in less matter into your body and you're getting the same energy. And so you weigh less, right? And in fact, if you calculate this out about the amount of weight that goes into a 2,000 calorie diet, you actually find that people do that you would have just less, bring in less matter into your body and lose a very significant amount of weight at a very similar rate that we actually see people lose weight on a ketogenic diet with high fat, getting a lot of their calories from their fat. So, this is all wrong. And, the whole idea of, calories in, calories out, this is, again, something just being pushed by the food companies and Coca-Cola. And, Coca-Cola founded the Exercises Medicine Foundation, where they're, oh, just move more, just eat less, move more. Oh, just calories in, calories out, because it serves their purpose. Because it says it doesn't matter what you eat, calories are interchangeable. Just don't want to eat too many of them. Bullshit. The calories that they're pushing are harmful, and they come with chemicals that are harmful. The calories that they're pushing, the carbohydrates, the sugars, have hormonal effects on our body that is harmful. They come with the plant defense chemicals and just artificial chemicals that are harmful. The fructose and sugar as well. I mean, you look at the just the raising of insulin. I mean, the weight gain, fat loss is majorly influenced by hormones like insulin. Insulin is your major fat storage hormone. Without it, you can't really store fat. So type 1 diabetics don't make insulin. They don't store fat. They can't store fat. They waste away until they die unless they get insulin. And then people that have an insulin secreting tumor, called an insulinoma, and they just pump out massive amounts of insulin. It doesn't matter what they eat. They get extraordinarily obese. And that's what we're talking about here. This is hormonally driven. Your body's in a different metabolic state, and you're either going to store fat or burn fat. And so if you eat carbohydrates, you're putting yourself, more towards that insulinoma, where you're having high insulin and you're going to be storing fat. And then we talk about the calories and things like that. So we've just been massively manipulated and misinformed. But this is how the body works. This is how the hormones work. And that's how calories work. They don't. Calories are nonsense. It's a nonsensical measure. Wood has calories. You're not going to get anything from it. Your hot tub has calories. For those who have hot tubs, you sit in there, you're going to be getting heat energy into your body, and you're not going to store fat when you do that, right? And you're not going to get all the energy that's required for your day just by being warm and exposed to calories. You're just not, right? Drinking a lot of warm, hot water, soaking yourself in saunas and things like that. Your body's going to get warmer. It's going to get hotter. It's going to have more calories. You're not going to gain weight. It's nonsensical, and you're not going to survive if you don't eat and you're just doing that. So, it's very problematic, to say the least, but people really need to stop and think about what is being said and what that actually means, because it is nonsense.
Yeah, and I think my favorite, just to sort of sum that up, my favorite way to think about it, what you mentioned earlier, is that it's very easy to turn animal parts into animal parts.
Hmm.
It's not easy for your body to turn leaves into animal parts.
Yeah.
It's just not meant to do that. You need such a special digestive system to be able to make that happen,
Yeah.
and it's just not the way that we're designed.
No, and the animals that do that have the ability to generally break down fiber and turn that actually into fat and protein. All animals need fat and protein. That's what it comes down to. And animals that eat fiber have the ability to break down fiber. It's not them that are breaking down fiber. No animal at all can break down fiber. Even termites can't break down fiber, even though they eat wood. They can't break it down. It's the microbes in their gut that eat it. And as a byproduct, as a waste product, they produce saturated fat. And then the microbes die off and those get absorbed as protein, right? And so a cow is eating grass, but what is absorbing is fat and protein. Gorilla is eating leaves, but what it's absorbing is fat and protein, and all the way down the line, right? Same with a termite. So people say, like, well, I see an ox and they have all this muscle, so I can just eat what an ox eats. And I'm like, well, if you were an ox, then yes, you could. But you're not an ox, you're an idiot. And so that doesn't work for you, right? And so we have a different digestive tract. We can't break down fiber in the way that an ox can. We have an appendix about that big. It's a vestigial organ. It's a vestigial cecum. It used to be 4 feet long, 5 feet long. And in gorillas and chimpanzees, it is. And they're called hind gut digesters. And so that fiber packs into that cecum, and that's where it ferments and breaks down into fat and protein. We lost that ability and we lost that organ because we have not needed it in millions and millions and millions of years, right? And so that's the thing. So you're not going to get the same fat and protein and nutrients from eating grass or fiber or wood or sawdust, which is what they put into processed foods and manufactured foods to up the fiber content, by the way, or make like ice cream thicker or frozen yogurt thicker. Swear to God, look it up. And so, that doesn't do anything for us nutritionally. How can fiber be an essential nutrient if it doesn't even provide any nutrients, right? We can't break it down. We can't use it. So there's no nutritional benefit from it. So how can it be an essential nutrient? It's not a nutrient at all. And so these animals that can break down fiber, they're the ones that can survive on this, and they get fat and protein. We can't get fat and protein from plants anymore. And so we need to get that from animals. That's, again, 70% of animal species are carnivores. And they eat other animals to get that fat and protein because they can't get it from plants. They can't break down the fiber. They're not turning sugars into fat and protein. I mean, you can get some conversions, if you get simple sugars in your body, but really not much, and certainly not to meet your metabolic demand. You need fat and proteins. We can't get it from plants. We need to get it. We need the right fat and proteins, and you need the right vitamins and minerals and nutrients that you cannot get properly from plants. You really just need to get it from me, and you can get it all from me. You don't need any plants. There's nothing in plants that you need, that you have to have, that you cannot get from eating meat. Even vitamin C, that you need massively smaller amounts of vitamin C when eating a meat-only diet, which is why Inuits don't get scurvy, which is why the polar explorers who ate the Inuit diet of just meat and blubber didn't get scurvy, but the ones who snuck in sailor's biscuits and bread did, right? Because depending on what you eat, you need a different constellation of nutrients. And so this is just disrupting our body's normal biomechanics by eating the wrong things. And it just causes all this disease and harm. And we could spend days going through all the different diseases that are manifest from eating the wrong thing. But basically, it just boils down to the fact that all these non-communicable chronic diseases, or the majority of them, are coming from a combination of toxicity and malnutrition, eating the wrong things, getting a toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet, and a lack of species-specific nutrition, namely too much plants and artificial crap that we've never eaten before, aren't designed for and cause harm, and not enough essential nutrients that we would get from fatty meat that are what our body requires for normal production. And like the cows with selenium deficiencies, they get muscular dystrophy. Well, how many of our diseases are nutritional deficiencies that we don't even realize are nutritional deficiencies? And we're just trying to treat these things biochemically and with pills instead of finding out what the hell is causing it. Saying, oh, here's something wrong here. Great. There's enough people that have it. Let's make a pill that addresses this. They're not looking for why this is increasing. They're not looking for why this is getting worse. Diabetes is not a metformin deficiency. People just don't make enough metformin, and all of a sudden they just get diabetes. So we need to supplement metformin. Or heart disease is a statin deficiency. Oh gosh, our bodies are. Some people just don't make enough statins, and so we just have to get this drugs out there. This is nonsense. That something else is happening, and instead of looking for the root cause and fixing it from the ground up, we're just trying to make expensive band-aids that just cover up the problem and make people a lot of money. And that has to go, because we're getting fatter and sicker than we have ever been in human history. And that is going in a very bad direction. And we are just getting worse and worse and worse, and people are suffering more and more and more. And that has to go, because we're getting to the end point here. We're getting to the point where we are getting so sick and so unwell that it's really unsustainable. And the life expectancy levels are coming down now in America and elsewhere. There could be other reasons for that as well, but that shouldn't happen, right? We have more technology, more access to food, more access to medical care, and yet things are getting worse, right? So that's a major, major problem. And I think it's so easy to address if you just recognize what's going on. You just eat like a human. That's what my friend Bill Schindler wrote a book called Eat Like a Human. He's a professor of paleoanthropology and archaeology. And saying, this is how humans used to eat. Do that. And really, that's just eating meat. And even post-agriculturally, we ate plants, but we detoxified them and fermented them and did different things to them to reduce the toxic load and increase the bioavailability of the nutrients. We're not doing that anymore. We're not even doing that, right? We're just, raw food, plants, just raw plants, it's so great. No, these things have toxins. You need to lower the toxic load if you're going to eat them, with fermentation and other sorts of things that we've been doing for thousands of years. But for tens of thousands of years, we weren't eating any of this crap. For hundreds of thousands of years, for millions of years, we were eating meat. So that's what humans are supposed to eat. You get back to that, then your body's going to work the way it's supposed to work. Animals in the wild are healthy. Humans in the wild are healthy if they're eating their natural diet. The natural state of life is that of health. If you have a species that's just killing itself, whether it's eating the wrong thing, it's just getting sick and diseased, they don't make it. Not in the wild anyway. They don't survive. They don't thrive. You have to thrive. You have to be doing better than all the other animal species around you, or else you're done, right? And so we became the most dominant species of animal that has ever existed during the ice ages, because of the ice ages, because we were forced to manifest our destiny as apex predators. And we're saying,
carnivores, because there were no plants that have, even if we wanted them.
That's it. Well, people were moving towards the equator to run away from the ice. No, they weren't. The fossil record is very clear. Homo habilis went up into the ice shelves, into the ice. And presumably that's where the megafauna was, right? That's where the mammoths were. That's where their prey was, right? That's what they wanted to eat. And so, we became the most dominant species on Earth because we became carnivores. Why would we be the one carnivores who have been carnivores for millions of years, that somehow being a carnivore is bad for our health? Do lions get sick? Do they get diabetes and heart disease from eating meat? Do dolphins? Do sharks? Do whales? Do birds of prey and other sorts of things? No. Why would we be the only species of animal to be harmed by this food source? It's complete garbage, especially when we've been adapted to it for so many millions of years. There is nothing inherently harmful in meat. And even if there were, we would be well adapted to it. There are plenty of things that are harmful in plants. And we've had some adaptation to it, but only 10,000 years. We had millions of years for meat, 10,000 years for plants, only in some populations. Other populations are much more recently introduced to this stuff, and they become much more sick when they eat Western food, plant-based food, agricultural food, agrarian food, they get much more sick. So we've had some adaptation. They're saying, yeah, 10,000 years, plenty of time. But 2 million years isn't? What's wrong with their brain, right? So these people are frauds, and they're trying to perpetuate a fraud on people. And, they're trying to sell whatever, that's fine, but they're doing it fraudulently. They're trying to push an ideology and a narrative that is fraudulent, it's fictitious, it doesn't meet with the observed facts and data, and it hurts people. So, that needs to go, and people need to understand these people are frauds. They're trying to explain away and say, oh, well, actually humans, yes, we've been eating meat for millions of years, but, it's still bad for us. So it's been causing heart disease this whole time. Then why isn't there any record of that ever? Right. And why is it that, and why would we, if we were all just dying of chronic disease and diabetes and cancer and heart disease, why would there be no oral tradition for any of this? Why would it be that you had multiple generations of people, old wise men and all these sorts of things, going back through antiquity of oral tradition, like Homer. I mean, Homer, wrote actually didn't write it because there's this prehistory, before the written word, developed this epic poem of thousands of pages long, memorized the damn thing, and he was supposed to live a very long time, and he passed this down through oral tradition, if people were just dying in their 30s, you wouldn't even be able to, you wouldn't have been able to live long enough to get your kids to adulthood. They would have just been 15, 16, and then they're just having kids, and now you're dying. That doesn't happen. You have all these traditional tribes that have multi-generational villages and tribes where you have, the old wise men and things like that, and they're the chiefs, and they're, the ones running the show, and then you have the younger hunters going around hunting and fighting and all that sort of stuff. So this is just fiction. These people are making it up as they go along to try to make their false narratives and claims somehow believable. But they know damn well it's complete and utter garbage. They just want to push an ideology for whatever reason, because they're so wrapped up in it that they just can't bear the thought of not believing it and investing so much of their time and effort into something that's just completely false and fictitious, or because they're financially invested in it and they make money off of this, or they have some sort of importance because of it, because they're made to feel special because of this, and they make these videos and people congratulate them and say, oh, good job, aren't you great? Yes, celery is a superfood and all this bullshit, and and that makes them feel good. But the vast majority of people that follow me, and the vast majority of people that say to me, you saved my life, were vegans, vegetarians, and plant-based for years, and it nearly killed them or made them very sick, and they were unwell. And then they come to this just complete flip and just go to meat only. And then they're healthiest that they've ever been in their entire lives. So this is not the difference between processed food garbage and a whole food animal-based diet, like they would be comparing these epidemiological plant-based diets, where it's just you're comparing basically eating junk food to not eating junk food. And look at that, not junk food does better. I'm shocked, right? But they're saying that the junk food is meat. Like, oh, look, plant-based is better than meat. No, you're comparing junk food to whole food, plant-based. Well, what about whole food plant-based compared to whole food meat-based? Well, you have all these people. I've nearly, it's 250, 60,000 people following me on YouTube. Most of them were vegans, vegetarians that had such bad health issues with whole food plant-based that when they switched to whole food meat-based, their health dramatically improved, right? And we look at the Akikuyu and the Maasai back in the 1920s. Akikuyu were largely vegetarian, Maasai largely animal-based, meat, milk, and blood of their cattle. And the Maasai were far healthier than the Akikuyu. They were living at the same time in the same areas, and they're genetically similar population because they intermarried, interbred. And this is the 1920s. There's no industrial pollution and smoke and all that sort of stuff, and industrial mass crop, chemical sprays and everything like that. They're living out in the wild. There's a vegan's dream. There's a whole food plant-based diet, living out in the beauty of Tanzania and Kenya out in the wilds, and yet they were sick. They were sick as hell. They were 5 inches shorter than the Maasai. They were 23 pounds smaller, lighter, and they were 50% weaker. They had worse dentition, worse health issues, more hospital admissions, but also they went from village to village to village and actually looking at people and checking their health. They didn't just rely on hospital records. They went to the villages because some of these people don't have access to hospital, right? So they went to the people. They found that the Maasai were far and away more healthy. And in fact, the warrior class that ate more meat, more blood, they were the healthiest. And they'd actually already started eating some millet seeds, some grains at that point, which was not typical, but that started getting into their diet. And then the Maasai women were next healthiest. And then it was the Akikuyu women. They had a more diverse plant-based diet. They had more leafy greens and not just a bunch of grains. The men would just eat tons of grains for some reason. And then the Akikuyu men were the worst, right? And so, and I've seen people lie on TikTok and things like that because I've talked about this before. And they say, oh, well, actually, the Akikuyu women were the healthiest of all four. Bullshit. They absolutely were not. That's a flat out lie. It was the Maasai men were the healthiest, then the Maasai women, then the Akikuyu women, then the Akikuyu men. 40 years later, you get into the 1970s, and some vegan people will say, "Oh, well, look at this study in the 1970s," and they start having increased rates of heart disease in the Maasai. And it's like, right, because they're eating more crap, they're eating more grains, they're eating more Western food. That's 40 years after this other study where there wasn't a single recorded case of heart disease in that entire study for the Maasai. And now 40 years later, when they're eating more crap, they start getting heart disease. Yeah, well, thanks for proving my point. You start eating this stuff, you start getting worse. I spoke to this guy who's actually named Australian of the Year last year or the year before, Dr. James Mukey, really nice guy. We were speaking at a conference together last weekend, and we were talking about this sort of stuff. And he said that back in the 80s, he actually worked in the Maasai with the Maasai, and was there. And he said the entire time he was there, he never saw a single case of heart disease the entire time he was there. Now it is more prevalent. You have more of them involved in Western civilization, eating more Western food, and Coca-Cola trucks go out to these villages every day, every morning, and they just sell out because they have no idea how bad this stuff is for them. And now their diabetes rates are going up, their tooth decay is going up, their other health problems are going up. I wonder why. And they say, oh, well, they're not all that healthy. They're not as healthy as people say, and they eat other things too. Yeah, that's why they're not as healthy, because they're eating these other things. You go back to the 1920s when they really weren't. They were only starting to eat more Western food and grains and crops, only just starting to. They were extraordinarily healthy, eating a very high fat diet, a very high saturated fat diet, and an animal based diet, or really animal exclusive diet. They had a lot of dairy, but they really didn't eat anything besides meat, blood, and dairy. It was all from an animal, and they started incorporating plants. So the only thing we have looking at whole food plant-based, whole food meat-based is the Maasai and the Akikuyu. Vast disparities between the two and their health. And so, there's so much information out there. There's so much evidence out there, and just people are being willfully blind to that. Or they're just being completely misled. But, when you see people right now in the hundreds of thousands going from a whole food plant-based diet or plant predominant, clean, healthy, omnivorous diet to an exclusively meat-only diet, and their health improves dramatically, that should tell you something. Oh, well, that's anecdotal. No, that's real-world results. That's what's happening to real people in the real world when they do this thing. And it's happening by the millions now. So you can dismiss this all you want as anecdotal, but pretty soon you're going to look a bit ridiculous. I mean, because millions of people are not anecdotal, right? And it doesn't matter what a study says. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is. If it doesn't agree with experiment and real world results, it's wrong. If it doesn't agree with the basic phenomena that we are observing It's wrong. If people are going plant-based to meat exclusive and their health improves, we don't see it in the other way. It's wrong. What you're saying is wrong. And you don't need a study to figure that out. Do you need a study to figure out that parachutes work? Where's a randomized controlled trial showing that parachutes work? Are you going to use a parachute? You'd be an idiot not to, because you can see with your eyes the vast difference it makes to jump out of an airplane with and without a parachute. So use your brain, use your eyes, and see what's in front of you. Eating meat is what we've been doing for millions of years, and that's the healthiest thing for us to eat. Plants have toxins we are not designed to eat, and so we cannot detoxify them, and we get harm. It's that simple. Don't put things in your body that don't belong there. Don't put things in your body. Don't eat anything that didn't exist during an ice age 50,000 years ago. Mammoth doesn't exist, but meat does. Animals do, and you can eat that. Don't eat this plant. These plants, some of these plants have been cultivated much more recently in the last few hundred years, few thousand years, and they didn't even exist 50,000 years ago and not certainly during an ice age, right? So that's what you have to think about. That's what you have to do, and you have to think critically. And they're saying, don't think critically. Just trust the experts. Trust the science, right? Never do that. Anybody tells you not to think critically, not to educate yourself, not to actually look into things and use your brain is because they are trying to trick you. That is what it is. They're saying, don't look at here. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Look over here at this distraction. That's what they're trying to do. There's an old saying that says, keep people ignorant, keep them under control. And that's what they're doing. They're saying, don't educate yourself. Don't think critically. We'll do the critical thinking for you. Oh, it's just so hard. Oh, you got a headache. So you don't need to do the critical thing. We'll do it for you because we just love you. Oh, and we just want to do everything nice for you, right? Of course you think critically. Of course you look at this evidence and examine it and think about it critically and rationally and go like, that doesn't make sense. And if you don't do that, you will end up in slavery and serfdom and sickness and pain. And that's nothing that anyone should have to experience. As good or bad as people are, the basis of life should be at least healthy, and then you get to live your life the way you want to after that. But we are being tricked into sickness and slavery, and we need to break out of that.
Absolutely. Dr. Chaffee, it has been such a pleasure diving into all these rabbit holes with you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome.
And I want everyone who just listened to all that to just think about this stuff, this crazy meat diet you've been hearing about. I know you've been hearing about it. Everyone's seen some Sean Baker thumbnail on their YouTube recommendation somewhere. Like, people have been hearing about it for a few years now, and they just think it sounds like a wacky thing still, but it's at least in the public discussion. So the next step for folks who maybe aren't medically trained and able to dive through all those different studies we talked about, you can do what I did and just spend a bunch of time going through these podcasts from independent creators like Dr. Anthony Chaffee here, who has put out, 200 plus episodes on the Plant Free MD podcast, something like that?
For the podcast itself, it's nearly 200, and then I've got a few hundred on YouTube. The ones on YouTube are have different shorts or clips. I mean, because obviously some of these things are hours long, and so I'll take out sort of like 10-minute, 15-minute chunks. I might put those on. And I do live, live Q&A sessions as well, and so there's more on YouTube. But yeah, the podcast sessions is about 200.
Well, that was where I started. I think I might have told you before we started recording, but that was my introduction to this whole crazy world, was just starting on episode 1. And to this day, I can't remember who told me to, or if I just found it on my own. I can't remember how I found it, but I just found your podcast. I started on the first episode, went all the way through, and I'm so thankful for the work that you do, just putting so much time and energy into all this, breaking things down for people, having fun while you're doing it. Just the work ethic is super inspirational, and we need more doctors like you out there. I know that the floodgates are beginning to peak open. I'm seeing more and more like MDs just coming out and saying, table flip, I'm out of here. This is garbage. It's time to start a YouTube channel or a podcast and start saying what is actually true, because enough people are figuring out that what they've been taught is not correct. And a lot of people are still looking for like authority figures that can speak really eloquently and like sort of parse the information down better, like myself. That's what I needed. If you give me a pile of studies, I'd be useless. But just the amount of podcasts out there, the content. Yeah, I mean, I'll put all of your socials in the show notes for sure. Is there anything else you'd like to throw out for shilling purposes before we sign off, sir?
No, I think that's it. Just if people want to learn more, like I said, I have my podcast, The Plant Free MD, and my YouTube channel is just my name, Anthony Chaffee MD. And then all the socials are generally Anthony Chaffee MD, like Instagram and things like that. And then like Twitter's Anthony_Chaffee. That's the only one that's a bit different. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Excellent. Appreciate you so much, sir. Thank you for coming by, and we'll be in touch.
No problem. Thank you for having me.